going on in the world, but it's very telling of where we've been and also the advocacy level in terms of our transportation. So I want to acknowledge and thank you for everybody for sticking in for the long haul. This is night 2 of senior presentations, class presentations. And I first would like to introduce to you our Deputy Director of PBOT, Millicent Williams, and she's here as a reviewer. And she's the only one representing the city tonight. We also have Bob Hasting from TriMet, one of our guest speakers, return, and also Aaron Golub with PSU. So first off, I just want to, I know we've heard from Aaron and Bob, but I just want to give you, Millicent, if it's okay, just a few minutes just for you to introduce yourself to the class. This is your second time at the class under the new evolution is what I renamed it as. So I'm really honored to have you here tonight. I know it's been a week, it's been a month, it's been quite a year for everybody. I don't know how people do it. I don't know how you do it, but you've been through a lot, and so we are very grateful for your presence tonight.
Well, I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much, Tui, and to the class. Thanks for including me in the class and for allowing me some insight into the presentations. As I'm sure has been shared, given that I know that you've had a couple of folks from PBOT to present, our mission at PBOT is to help all Portlanders to get from place to place safely, easily and sustainably. Our goal is to build a transportation system that serves the needs of Portland's residents, including all of you. So given this, I'm very interested in seeing where new initiatives are needed and what needs are in the community that we could meet to an even greater degree. I've been at PBOT for just about 4 years, first as the division manager for our capital projects division, which is the group responsible for building improvements to the city's transportation infrastructure. That includes large-scale projects like the upcoming Flanders Crossing and Earl Blumenauer bridges, to smaller but vital things like neighborhood crossings on routes to schools and other neighborhood destinations. I became deputy director in March of this year, March 1st. So I've been busy doing non-focused things to ensure that our bureau could continue to move forward in a way that would allow us to continue to serve the community the way that we should, taking into consideration all of the challenges that 2020, especially the last 9 months of 2020, have brought. I guess the good thing is that in one of my past lives, I worked in emergency management. And so some of the challenges that we've had to work through are things that I've had a fair amount of experience with navigating. So if you can make something good out of a bad thing, I guess that's one. I was able to transfer some skills. Anyway, as we look ahead to emerging out of the pandemic, and I certainly don't have a crystal ball and know when that will happen, but we do know that tomorrow will come. And so we have a number of priorities. Some of them are tied to long-term goals at PBOT, and others are related to things we learned about during this public health emergency. So topping the list of priorities for me, and Tui asked for me to share something about priorities, I am largely focused on ensuring that we are delivering projects, even though I'm no longer the delivery manager. That is something that our director would like for me to have a laser-like focus on. And we deliver projects all across the Bureau, so not just in the project space, but also in maintenance operations and in our engineering services group, at DPT, Development Permitting and Transit, and even within parking and regulatory. And so the goal, though, is to ensure, for those of you who are familiar with project management principles, that we're delivering on scope, schedule, and budget. And that is not without its challenges in the environment in which we live and in which we operate in terms of how we engage. But we're going to work to ensure that we're meeting those goals because they're really important. We want to make sure that we're building trust with community, that we're delivering on the things that we say that we're committed to delivering, and that we're doing so in a way that really is going to allow folks who are living in communities to see the difference, to feel the difference, and to know that we heard and seen the things that were concerns for you. So another part of the work, of course, is how we work to engage contractors across the board. And we have a large number of contracts that we let, whether they're for design or other services or construction. And so we have a series of rules that we need to ensure that we're following, but we also need to make sure that as we're working to engage contractors, consultants, and others, that we're viewing that work through an equity lens and ensuring that we're creating opportunity across the full spectrum of service providers that could be providing valuable support to the city. So with all of that said, I know that there are a number of ways that we can streamline our processes so that we can build things more efficiently and deliver the results that Portlanders deserve more quickly. I will say though, sometimes it just takes a long time. And when you're building projects in a climate such as the one that we have in the Pacific Northwest, you also have limitations as to when you can do things. So one would say, well, you don't have anything happening in the fall. Why aren't you out paving, you know, part of your 100-mile goal? Well, because it's raining and you can't do certain things in the rain. When it's too cold, you can't do certain things. When it's too dry, you can't do certain things. And so everything has a season and we work to fit things within seasons. And sometimes we have some challenges with doing that. So we can streamline, we can make things more efficient. And we learned many of these lessons as we work to implement our Fixing Our Streets program, the first of the big gas tax measures that passed now 5-6 years ago. It was a 10-cent fuels tax, and it went to ensure that we were doing maintenance and safety projects across the city. So about $70 million in projects that were delivered over the course of 4 years. And that really required us to think differently about how we worked to deliver. And so now we're going to use some of those principles and improve on the things that we learned in that first round for Fixing Our Streets 2, which did pass by an overwhelming margin in May of this year. So at the end of 2019, we launched Moving to Our Future, which is the newest iteration of our Bureau's strategic plan. And just given the things that happened over the course of this year, we were forced to place our strategic planning implementation on hold, but we are pleased to be picking that work back up as we move into the new year. And we look forward to engaging in that work with whoever will be our new transportation commissioner. So as you know, we will be, or perhaps you know, we will be getting a new commissioner in charge of transportation at the beginning of the new year. And so we look forward to working with whoever that person may be, we do not know, to move us to that future that we so desire. We're also working on transportation justice. It's a central element of our strategic plan. It's a commitment to transportation justice. This means, on the one hand, overcoming the legacy of past racist decisions that excluded or unfairly burdened Portland's communities of color. But it also means, on the other, taking proactive steps now to ensure that our programs and policies fairly benefit all Portlanders. This commitment has only gotten stronger in the face of this past summer's movement for racial justice and for inclusion and for change, to policies, to practices, and to ways that we're connecting with community. So as a team of 1,000 people. We're adapting to the new normal, and I guess it's an old saying now to call it a new normal. This is just what we do now. Our fourth priority will be adapting to the reality of a post-pandemic Portland. The pandemic has forced significant changes on how we operate. We've moved a significant portion of our workforce to remote work, which was no small task. I work in the Portland building, and the floor that I worked on, I work on the 14th floor. We have about 150 people that would typically be on that floor on a daily basis. And for the past 9 months, I have been the only person on that floor. So we've had to figure out a lot. We've stopped all in-person public engagement and altered our communications priorities. To the extent that we're able to get back to a new normal, we will shift back to pre-pandemic ways of doing things. However, maybe we should use this opportunity to begin to really seriously rethink what we were doing and use it as a catalyst to change some things. We don't want to lose insights. And, as we look at teleworking as options, as we look at being more creative with people's time, creating opportunities for people to do at-home schooling and other things, we'll need to see what changes we make permanent. And then, of course, I mentioned community involvement before, but I cannot underscore enough. And I know that our director, Chris Warner, mentioned it on last week. And I know that you've learned it over the course of the past semester. This class is one of the pillars of Portland's community-driven transportation ecosystem. So having so many engaged and well-informed community advocates is one of the reasons that Portland has been able to be a leader in forward-thinking transportation initiatives. By advocating for your community's needs, you have a direct role in helping to steer PBOT in the right direction. And now, more than ever, we need robust community input because we're facing some really significant challenges. We have the ongoing pandemic and the challenge of using our transportation system in a way that makes sure that Portlanders can get to places safely. As we emerge from the pandemic, we will have the challenge of repairing the damages and stresses from this last year on our system. We're also going to need to figure out what lessons we should have learned or will continue to learn from the pandemic. For example, could we use widespread teleworking as a way, as I mentioned, to address congestion and to make gains in shrinking our carbon footprint? We also must build on and expand the energy of this summer's movement for racial justice. At PBOT, we're really reckoning with how transportation has in the past contributed to inequalities in Portland, and what we must do now to ensure that we don't make those same mistakes and instead build a transportation system that follows the principle of transportation justice. I share this anecdote about transportation and specifically the Black experience as a Black woman. I can't speak for all of the population, Black population, but I can speak to some experiences from experience, but also from the storytelling in my community. And the fact of the matter is that transportation for many communities of color, and specifically for the Black community, it's as much a source of pain as it is a source of promise. So, when we talk about things like the bus boycott, when we talk about things like access to roadways that are safe and passable and that are well lit. My mother tells me about the times when she grew up in the Jim Crow South, they would go to board a bus, but they couldn't go through the front door. You went to pay at the pay station in the front of the bus, then you had to get off of the bus and go to the back door to get on the bus to sit in the back of the bus. And often after the passengers or would-be passengers would pay their fare, as they're walking to the back of the bus driver would drive off. And And so you've now paid your fare. You do not have an option to get to work or wherever you're going, and you ended up walking. And so, the bus boycott and the movement that ensued, that was a year-long period of people figuring out how to do transportation differently. And we could have used that moment as a catalyst to ensure that the way that we engage in transportation and the way that we move people about the city um, was was one that would not cause as much damage to the climate, one that would not cause as much pain to people. Um, but Instead, the converse happened, and people felt the need to have their own and make sure that they could get to where they needed to go safely. And we continue to see that pattern persist, even as there are more opportunities and there is greater access. Um, but it's transportation is an interesting thing to be in, and so my hope is that and I could tell another story, maybe I'll tell it later, about how my mother almost got ran off the road by someone driving a tractor as she was walking home from the market with her bags, and she couldn't her father couldn't do anything because if he were to engage with the white man who was driving the tractor, who was trying to push my mother off the road and did clip her shoulder, then he could have been retaliated against. And so again, transportation as a source of pain, even though it was a source of movement. So my hope is that your participation in this class this semester has been meaningful, helpful, and opened your eyes to a whole new world, and provided for you a greater appreciation, but also greater insight into how you can affect change, how your voice can be heard, how you can be an advocate for your community, for your family, for your friends, for the future of this city, and how you can ensure that we're creating a safer, more sustainable, and more inclusive transportation system in Portland. So I'll be hanging out for a while, and encourage you to think about how you can continue in your activism and engagement around transportation. We have a number of committees that we're always looking for really enthusiastic participants to be a part of, from our budget advisory committee, our fixing our streets committee. There are any number, the bicycle advisory, pedestrian advisory, all the committees, the transit, the freight committees. I mean, and not that all of them are just, you can just decide you want to be on, but there are ways that you can be involved. So I encourage you to visit our website, join our email list, email me if you'd like, so that you can stay informed about our community, our committees, other opportunities, and how you can be involved with the Bureau. Again, thank you for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you come up with.
Thank you so much, Millicent. Thank you so much for your professional perspective, but also your very deep personal story. It's very heartfelt to know and understand, and can only imagine the world that your people came from and what you experienced, the pain and the passion. Still now to this day, it's very prevalent. And that's the reason why we still have this class, right? That's a reason why transportation is still equity is so important. So I just want to reiterate that it's such an honor to have you here. And thank you so much for your story. But for the students, yeah,
it's
truly.
exciting. It's exciting to be a part of the class. It's exciting to be at PBOT at this time. It's exciting to be able to have your voice heard, and to be able to bring perspective. I think it's no secret about the demographics of the city of Portland, and that carries over into the way that the city is planned and how things are considered. And no group of people we're not monoliths in our different classifications, but it's been fun to bring in a perspective that folks perhaps have have not heard. I'm not only not a part of the majority of the folks in Portland in terms of my race and ethnicity, but I'm not from the West Coast. I'm from the East Coast. And so it's a whole different type of energy and calls to questions about the ways that we do things. And I think I surprise people sometimes with my candor and I'm a little blunt. They'll be all right. You're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. But it's been good. So.
That means the city really needs you, but I also feel the importance of the city really needing this, the advocacy from the students. So students, your role is really important. So we're gonna get started, but before we do presentations, I'm gonna give Michael a minute so he could do a screenshot of us as a class photo.
Yes, I'd love to take a class photo, and normally we'd all, gather around, but I'll invite you to turn on your cameras if you're comfortable with that. And 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Okay, we're all set.
Thank you. So without any further ado, what I'll do is we'll have Malsri start, bring up the presentations, and Nick will go first. So I'll give you the floor, Nick. And reviewers, last week, I had a score sheet and I had everything kind of laid out, but one of the things I want to do is actually have you engage with the students in a way where we can also make the time go by as and also listen to everybody. So your engagement will, if you can engage with the students via the chat, that would be the best in terms of comments as we get through all these presentations. So I'm going to hand it over to Nick. I'm going to give you the floor so you can present on your project. So I want to remind you, it's between 3 to 5 minutes so that we can get through all of this. Okay, sure. Thank you.
Okay. So my name is Nick Hodge. My project is called Plazas for All Portlanders. Next slide, please. So I'm a relatively new Portlander. I moved here in January, and one of the first places that I went to was Pioneer Courthouse Square. And I found out it's referred to as Portland's living room. I thought it was an interesting urban space and kind of moved on, but I've started to think about it more since COVID. And typically I would walk by this going to work or just on the bus or on the Max, but I haven't really been downtown much at all. And so I thought it was an interesting opportunity to think about how to decentralize this type of space and to give communities across Portland access to this type of plaza infrastructure and an opportunity to see each other and socialize and gather. Next slide, please. So some of my background research was the book Palaces for the People. And one of my favorite examples is the example the author opens up with about the Chicago heat wave of 1995 and neighborhoods that were just separated by kind of a main thoroughfare that had very similar demographics fared a lot differently that during that heat wave, just based on social infrastructure and the social ties that were present in the community. And then I've also been really interested by Barcelona's superblock strategy, where they push most car traffic to the periphery of a set zone of blocks and then return some of that car space to people, whether it's, you can see playground space or just people on benches, just open space for people to gather. I think it's just been really interesting to see that happen. Next slide, please. So this summer with COVID, we had the opportunity to see some really cool spaces like this pop up basically overnight with the Safe Streets Healthy Businesses program that PBOT did. These are just photos that I took this summer, kind of visiting the mall and seeing what different neighborhoods and restaurants were teaming up to do. Yeah, next slide, please. Excuse me, this is an October snapshot of that program. The blue and purple are permits that were filed, and then the green refers to the neighborhood greenways, and the pink are busy streets, installations like expanded walkways or corridors. Next slide, please. What I found interesting though was when I overlaid these permits under the equity matrix, I saw far fewer permits filed in different parts of the city, especially as you move out to outer Portland, there were basically none. So I started to think about how we can get this type of infrastructure and these types of gathering spaces in our streets in all communities of Portland. So next slide, please. I did connect with someone from PBOT through this class, and he made me aware of 2 programs that went on this summer to try to combat some of this. It was the National Association of City Transportation Officials, the Streets for Pandemic Response and Recovery Grant Program. PBOT was awarded $25,000 for their project, Black-Centered Spaces for Community and Business in Albina. And they were also allocated about $50,000 for 5 to 10 groups for a similar program across the city, which is really encouraging to see. I had looked for this type of information before, and I hadn't heard of anything like this happening until I spoke with a PBOT employee. But I think it also starts to beg the question, should we rely on private restaurants to provide this type of space for us, or should we rely on businesses to kind of create this plaza space? Next slide, please. And so I started to think about what these types of spaces could look like, what the potential is for these spaces. So this isn't based on any real space. It's kind of just a typical Portland situation where you have kind of a main street and then a residential street meeting it. And so we've kind of become really familiar with this restaurant configuration, but I started to think about through this class, like other things that could take place, especially after we had a whole class about emergency situations. So I thought about how post-earthquake, or even in this space, we could use it as a gathering space for people to gather supplies or get information. A market configuration, there's already a ton of farmers markets in Portland, but maybe there's a way to highlight local makers or local sellers and just bring community together in communities in their own community. Like I talked about with Pioneer Courthouse Square, I'm really interested in how we can decentralize that type of space. And maybe it's just benches and chairs like in the community configuration, or as I've also learned this summer as a new resident, that our libraries are a really important system, and they seem to be basically bursting at the seam already. So maybe there's a way to partner with them and do some outdoor programming in communities that are underserved by the library currently that measure is trying to address. So overall, this project's been interesting to look at, and I was really excited to see that kind of my initial question of looking at it through the equity lens was kind of already being addressed, and I enjoyed being able to think about the possibilities. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Nick. So as I said before, comments and questions, is put it in the chat. Thank you so much. Next up will be Paul and Mulsri. Can you bring up Paul's presentation? I want to make sure that we keep with time and we get done early. In time, I want to also announce the scavenger hunt winners too, after the presentations are over. So Paul, you're up next.
Sounds good. Just waiting for presentation.
Can you see that on my screen, Paul?
I can, yeah, if you want to start it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is can our non-motorized network support our non-motorized goals? So pretty much looking at, you know, these non-motorized goals that PBOT has for these pinch points. And actually, before I get started, I'd like to recognize that we are all on unceded land. And yeah, so anyway, so examining bridges for pinch points, especially at the beginning of COVID, you know, I was going around town and looking at sidewalks and realizing, like, public health wise, like it's just awful design. Like all of our bridges, all these pinch points, like there's not enough space for 6 people, not enough space for really anybody. And it's 40% of public land in Portland is roadway. And I feel like one of the great disservices to the people of Portland in the time of COVID has been the lack of allocating that public space to people. All right, next slide. All right, so then what are our actual goals? This is pretty much it. 30% single occupancy vehicle, 12.5% base. The numbers actually say carpool, which is effectively I feel like is car share based on some presentations that we've had, which it effectively boils down to 42.5% of trips still being taken by car, in spite of what PBOT tells us are their mode design goals for the network, as is shown on this triangle of modal priority. Next slide, please. Oh, wait. Next slide. Yep, there we go. All right, so yeah, why does it matter? As has been brought up, you know, the ability to cross these bridges and to cross the Willamette itself is pretty important when it comes to climate and disaster resiliency. In terms of sustainability, being able to cross without needing a car, you know, this non-motorized network is future-proof when both gasoline-powered vehicles and electric vehicles end up failing us all. It's an accessibility issue for people that aren't, for people that just are disabled. Connectivity issue, obviously. And equity plays a huge role here too for the kind of access to jobs that are downtown. Next slide, please. And so when I started looking at this, I started looking at the actual like kind of inch spaces that there are for people to move. Some of this is from public, or oh, sorry, next slide. Oh wait, no, sorry, never mind. I'm looking at two computer screens here. And so the number of 6-foot lanes wasn't something to consider, like I said, in the time of COVID, just to be more attentive to what space is actually available and healthy for the public to travel on. And some of these numbers I had to go and field measure. Some of them, like I said, were publicly accessible. And this is just kind of like a spreadsheet crunching the numbers into lanes for 6-foot lanes, because I believe that's also just kind of the standard accepted measure for lanes. And just in terms of like a data practice kind of thing, it was interesting just having the difference in totals between the 6-foot lanes with trailing decimals of feet and rounded numbers 6-foot lanes. That's a difference of almost 2.5 full lanes of travel. Next slide, please. And so what can these facilities actually support? This is from Central City in Motion, 2,500 people per hour in a protected bike lane. And I just extrapolated that for all non-motorized modes. Next slide, please. And click again. Yeah, so what do all these numbers mean? And these numbers were provided by Mike Serratello for trips per day into, around, and out of the downtown core. And I'm not a GIS whiz enough to get into kind of the crunching number ability of you know, all the counters in the areas. So this doesn't take into account trips on the Central East side. Next slide, please. So let's put all this together. One more click. And so yeah, so essentially this can absolutely be the numbers of 25% mode share by 25% mode share. It really doesn't matter because those lanes can, in theory, support all the trips made every day in, out, and around of the downtown core. And I included Selwood in this. I did not include Ross Island. I don't consider Ross Island to be an accessible bridge. I tried to get some actual ADA accessibility information from Multnomah County engineers, but never got back, never managed to get in touch with them. Next slide, please. So looking forward, yeah, will these bridges even be here in 2035? Considering the comments made kind of in brevity and jest last week about deferred maintenance of facilities, I moved here from Seattle. Before that, I was in Minneapolis, and I was in Minneapolis in 2007 when the I-35 bridge collapsed. I was 6 blocks away at my buddy's apartment, and I was going to school. I worked in that neighborhood, and I lived in that neighborhood for the next 7 years. So like deferred maintenance is like a real issue, and I think it's like it's going to definitely affect capacity not only of non-motorized road or non-motorized network, but obviously the motorized network too. Click again, one more click for me, and then yeah, will commutes even matter in 2035? As Millicent said, this work from home rate in the time of COVID has just skyrocketed. You're seeing a lot more better improvements in telecommunications for people to be able to work from home. I've been working from home since 2015 when I moved to the West Coast from Minneapolis. And so, yeah, it's just going to be really interesting to kind of see how we come out of this. And yeah, one of the things I really would have liked to examine during this too is kind of the Safe Streets network. But anyway, that's my presentation. Thank you.
Nice work. Thank you, Paul. That was good. That's great. Next up is Phil.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Malshri, do you have my presentation? Did you get that?
Yeah, I'm opening it right up.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about TNCs. Next slide, please. And a TNC is most commonly known as a rideshare company. TNC is Transportation Network Company, and you most often see them as Uber, Lyft, and there's others. There will be others. And they have come to dominate the transportation landscape. Next slide, please. So today I want to do a quick flyover of really the roles in how to electrify TNC fleets with electric vehicles. I identified 9 different roles. It's a complex problem, as I learned the deeper I got into it. And using an equity overlay puts drivers at the center for some specific reasons I'll talk about in a moment. I also wanted to focus on airports because I work at PDX, and we have seen the TNCs just take over the taxi market completely in the past couple of years. Significant shift. Next slide, please. All right, so there's 2 goals for my project. Really, it is to, first of all, electrify the TNC fleet. That's new or used vehicles for drivers. That's a sustainability goal. And it's to specifically increase driver take-home pay. That's an equity goal. And this TNC project is squarely in the overlap of those 2 things. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the sustainability goal. Obviously, electric vehicles don't burn gas. That has a bunch of benefits. It also turns out electric vehicles don't break down as much. They're lower cost to operate. They don't break as often. I already said the TNCs are here to stay. And the electric vehicles themselves have improved dramatically. The battery range and the charging ability cycles are now really competitive and superior to gas. Finally, there's a bunch of leased electric vehicles. When they come off lease, they can be purchased at a significant discount to a new vehicle. Next slide, please. Goal 2 matters because we're talking about increased pay, and that means directly increasing access to prosperity for the drivers. And the drivers largely are in marginalized groups. This is a very accessible job for people who are new to the country, or for people who have trouble working in other sectors or just want to work in this sector for reasons of flexibility or whatever. However, the TNCs have been super successful at separating revenue from cost using technology, and that's the Uber and Lyft apps that you use to call your rides. And the deal is that the companies get the profits and they really control the customer and their behavior. The drivers get the costs, all of the vehicle costs, as well as the purchase cost. Therefore, if you can reduce the vehicle cost, you increase the driver income. Next slide. All right, so for each of the different roles that I identified, there's a bunch of barriers. This is really a summary of what they are. Drivers need to know about them. And right now the education is not necessarily there for all drivers. There's need to be incentives to switch as well, because there's a significant barrier to making the changeover. Drivers need to have ranges for long trips. They need to be able to maximize their turn times, which means fast charging in convenient locations. They need to be able to buy a good used, preferably used or lower cost electric vehicle. That comes down to the dealers and again, the information set. And they need to be able to finance the purchase. A lot of the drivers have trouble proving their income because they work in informal sectors of the economy, and the down payment can be a significant impediment to starting. Finally, the ability to charge at home is a significant challenge since many of the drivers live in rental properties and the landlord controls whether or not you can install a charging unit. So I have two examples of solutions here. Those are, I've identified some of the barriers. Next slide, please. Fast charging. So it takes time to charge these vehicles. If you get paid per trip, you need to make as many trips as possible. And the solution there is faster chargers. A level 3 charger is about 1,000% faster than a level 1 charger. It is also significantly more expensive. Next slide, please. As this slide demonstrates. So the red circle shows what level 3 chargers are. You can see the cost to purchase them is $25,000 to $40,000 compared to $800 to $1,500 for a level 1 charger on the far left. It is also a very significant cost to your electrical service to upgrade it for these fast chargers. The solution there is to get the infrastructure subsidized by people with deep pockets. Next slide, please. And airports have deep pockets, as well as the ability to already have a built-in sustainability mission. A ginormous electric bill that installing chargers will not necessarily make a big dent in the electric consumption. And this is a place where people congregate. This is a transportation node. It makes good sense to install charging, and free charging makes a lot of sense at airport locations because there's controlled access and you can protect the infrastructure as well as regulate who uses it. Next slide. So those are, I touched on those two examples of barriers. Every single one of these roles has its own set of barriers that I learned about in the project. I'm not going to go into them today because time doesn't allow it. But for every barrier, there is a solution, and there are folks working on these solutions. Next slide, please. So my conclusion is a complex problem has a solution, but it's a complex solution. It requires more work. When you center equity, it requires more work yet. And so that means the policymakers and the stakeholders need to be focused on that level of additional effort. There's a place for someone to convene and coordinate all of these roles and the complexity of the project, and that airports can also play an important role in achieving this goal. I think that's it for me. Is there a next slide, Maltry? Thanks.
Great, thank you. I do want to have a question. Maybe you can put the answer in the chat, Phil. You made a comment saying that if you include equity, it's going to be more expensive. But I think that's also a good thing to think about, because in terms of like community engagement, would it be more expensive, or is it more expensive, or does it really, it's the right thing for the project, but in the long term, does it really save the community? In making sure that equity is involved. So
right. Well, what I meant to say, what I think I might have said is it increases complexity, not necessarily cost, but certainly the level 3 chargers increase cost.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Riley, you're up next.
Okay.
And Maltry, if you can bring up a presentation, that would be great.
Okay, so for my project, I decided to look into TriMet's response during the coronavirus pandemic and what has and hasn't really been working so far. So next slide, please. Just some very basics on COVID. It can spread through droplet and potentially aerosol spread. And some of the main ways that can reduce the spread is hand hygiene, mask usage, and physical distancing. And all three of those can especially the physical distancing causes an issue when on public transit because of the densely packed nature of riders, at least pre-pandemic. Next slide, please. So here's some of the things that TriMet has been doing so far. Encouraging touchless methods, installing barriers, having hand sanitizer and masks available for free, and also touchless exits out the back doors and spacing out which seats people can sit in. Next slide, please. Here we can see one of the issues that has come up as these safety measures have been implemented. Operating cost per rider has increased greatly, especially when we think about deep cleaning measures like hydrogen peroxide foggers and overnight cleaning work that's being done. With the CARES Act, $126 million was given to Portland for lost revenue in 2020 and the new safety equipment. But as you can see, the cost per boarding ride has gone up in some cases for local buses up to over $15 per person boarding. So that is a huge jump in cost. Next slide, please. Alongside those huge jumps in costs, the boarding rates have gone way down, dropping beyond 80% less of what's normal. And part of this was in response to public health messaging to encourage people to stay home and only take essential trips, which is important. And initially, bus schedules changed very drastically, dropping some service down to like 50% and moving to weekend schedules because of the low ridership that was expected. However, a lot of the bus lines have been returned to close to what they were pre-COVID, but still juggling fewer riders and rising costs is a difficult situation. Next slide, please. So some of the concerns that this brings up, that long-term cuts in services will leave people without rides, especially people who have disabilities or people who are low income and rely on transit for the majority of their transportation. For example, 2/3 in the United States, 2/3 of essential workers are people of color, of those who are riding public transportation. Another concern is that encouraging fewer people to ride transportation has led to more people driving single-use vehicle or single occupancy vehicles, and that could halt some of the necessary climate change steps that we are taking as a city. And thinking back to the 2008 financial crisis, a lot of cities responded to that by cutting services, which ended up leading to longer term drops in ridership. And that would also have some negative effects. Next slide, please. So all around, some other cities have found some innovative solutions to this. Just to highlight a couple, some places are replacing the poles on their train cars with copper poles, which have virucidal properties, and the virus will last only for about 8 hours on those compared to several days on a stainless steel or plastic pole. Some places are reusing their smaller vehicles in the fleet to work as on-demand transportation, similar to how a rideshare would work, but to take essential workers to their destinations or to take people to grocery stores. This is something that I've also seen a little bit in Portland, but running their buses as drop-off only or advertising that the bus is at capacity to the riders who are at the stop. So letting people know that the bus that they may be trying to get on is going to be too crowded. Also, something that could be done is staggering start times to reduce transit demand during rush hour. And in China, facial recognition technology has been used to alert drivers when passengers refuse to wear a mask, but there are some ethical concerns to this as far as people having various reasons for not being able to wear a mask and surveillance concerns. Next slide, please. So some solutions that might work in Portland would be those long-lasting hygienic solutions like copper fixtures could be added to the train poles. We could also utilize ridership data, tracking which buses are typically having the most ridership, and then using that to determine where we should prioritize sending buses or more frequent buses so that riders aren't left waiting. We could incentivize employers to have more people work from home or stagger starting shift times. To reduce congestion that might be seen with multiple buses, serving more people with less space. We could prioritize building more rose lanes to reduce that congestion. And lastly, interlining, which would be having the same driver switch onto a second route directly from their first using the same vehicle. Next slide, please. So some of the key takeaways here, making sure that frontline workers have all the PPE they need, and training to identify riders who might be ill so that they can clear out their bus and then take it to the garage to get it deep cleaned. The measures recommended by the CDC right now are some of the most effective ways, and it has been successful so far because there have been very few outbreaks of COVID-19 that have been traced back to riding public transportation. However, it's difficult because so many people who ride are riding for short periods of time and often with strangers. So contact tracing efforts are difficult when you don't know the other people who you might be around. And also just making sure that anything that is a short-term cut is remediated in the long term so that we don't see losses in ridership once we have conquered this pandemic. And then finally, riders must have trust in the public transportation to keep them safe. So making sure that TriMet is transparent with everything that's going on and able to work with public health to prevent any sort of outbreaks. So, I think that's the end of my presentation. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Very thoughtful and very timely. We also have Bob from TriMet who's joined us as a reviewer. So perhaps we can engage in a dialogue and go from there. Very good research, very good research. So next up is Steve.
Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Leathers. I'm going to be talking to you today about launching an electric bike share fleet in the third quarter of 2020. Also, just so you know, we're going to burn through these slides real quick. So in September of this year, Biketown launched an entirely new fleet of e-bikes. I don't know if you've seen them. I see them around pretty frequently. They're a lot faster and lighter than the old fleet. Next slide, please. It would have been a really strong launch moment for them early in September. However, there were massive wildfires that blanketed the city in smoke. And 2 days after this fleet went live, it shut down for an entire week. This had a pretty drastic effect on Biketown's earned media that they would have amassed from all of the press. It's so rare that we get a feel-good story in the year 2020, and the wildfires made it not existent. Next slide, please. The pandemic also led to a huge decrease in system usage. It was estimated that 60% of trips were work commutes. In general, since the pandemic started, Biketown trips are down 70% on average. Next slide. The e-bike fleet is still really new, but in talking with Biketown and PBOT, there have been a few really intriguing trends that have sort of emerged based on early data. One is that membership is down, and we'll get into that a little bit in the further slides, but trips are going up, which is pretty interesting. Trips are also covering more distance now that these are electric assist bicycles. It's easier to go farther distances for a lot of people. Next slide, please. This report's going to look at 3 major changes that the system made and their equity implications. The first of which is service area expansions, platform changes, and pricing changes. There's a dozen other things that I wanted to get to that I couldn't, but we're gonna stick with these just for the sake of time. Next slide. The first big thing that I want to talk about is the service area expansions. So the new e-bike fleet allows for a much expanded service area. This is the first time that bikes are allowed to be parked east of Interstate 205. We added 60% more service area to the system than 2018, which is the last service area expansion. And we're now 3 times the size of area as when the bike share launched in 2016. This is all well and good, but if we go to the next slide, overlaying this with the equity matrix's race criteria, you can see that there's still a long way to go. Early on in 2016, there was almost no overlap with areas that have higher percentages of communities of color. Now we're sort of getting into that on the east side of town, but there's still plenty of neighborhoods that have no access. On the next slide, we'll take a look at the stations. Again, we're seeing more stations east and to the north. However, a lot of those neighborhoods aren't covered. And this is important because with the changes to the platform, you now need to park your Biketown bike at a station rather than just any public bike rack. Otherwise, you would incur a $1 fee. The one caveat here is that this doesn't affect the areas east of 72nd Avenue. It's everywhere west, but still sort of kind of a pain for the people who live in farther north and northeast neighborhoods. On the next slide, we'll take a look at some platform changes. Like I just mentioned, locking at stations. This is a big change. Some of the folks who use the system, and including members of the Bicycle Advisory Committee, were not particularly happy about this. Before, you could lock your Biketown bike up to any public rack for no extra charge, as long as it was in the service area. But now, if it's not locked to a Biketown station, you'll get a $1 fee. Another interesting change is that the minimum age requirement was lowered to 16. Previously, you had to be 18 to use Biketown. Now we're getting a little bit more folks who are able to try the system at a younger age, which is really interesting. No keypads on the new system. So this was sort of a point of consternation for a lot of users before. The old keypads were a little bit sticky. They didn't function very well. They had to be replaced at one point in the early iteration of the system. The new system allows for users to book bikes with the Biketown app, the Lyft app, or if they don't have smartphone access, they can get a membership card. This is sort of good and bad. In the times of COVID, it's great to not have to touch anything and worry about virus transmission. However, for people who are unbanked or for people who don't have smartphones, it's just an extra step and it's another hurdle for them to get on the system. And another thing is that return credits, which were a really big hit with the previous iteration, are no longer allowed. They're not doing $1 credits for returning bikes that were out of hub to a Biketown station. Next slide, please. Which brings me to pricing changes. So the new fleet came with a pretty substantial price increase for a lot of people, and some people were upset. Previously, if you were a Biketown member, you could ride the bikes for 90 minutes a day, which is great. But now with the new fleet, if you're a member, it's 10 cents a minute. So no matter what, every ride that you take comes with a marginal cost. If we go to the next slide, Biketown for All, which is the program for Portlanders who are living on a fixed income, this also saw a price increase of 40%. So previously the charges were $3 per month. Again, you get that 90 minutes of riding time. Now it's $5 a month and you get only 400 minutes of monthly usage, which for some people was probably good enough, but for some people this equates to basically 20 minutes of ride time for every workday in a month, which I don't know, I think a lot of people probably live a bit farther than 10 minutes from their job, but there's also the fact that these bikes do go a little bit faster, so some time could be saved there. Next slide, please. So in thinking about equity and opportunities for bike share, we can go to the next slide. Some of these things are things that PBOT are actively pursuing right now. One opportunity is partnering with essential organizations. So earlier in the pandemic, Biketown announced that essential workers would be eligible for discounted trips. aggressively pursuing partnerships with a lot of these essential organizations could really increase membership and ridership, given that people who work in some essential jobs aren't following like a 9-to-5 work schedule. There's a possibility that these users could help rebalance the system when things get back to normal. And another big opportunity area here is healthcare organizations. So these represent some of the largest employers in the Portland area. And hospitals are generally geographically really well distributed throughout the city. Next slide, please. Another opportunity is small businesses and BIPOC community organizations. Again, PBOT is on it. They're already pursuing some of these partnerships. They're working with Apano, Multnomah County Reach, Black Girls Do Bike, among others. But partnering with these groups to determine what the big barriers for people using Biketown for the communities they represent is a good first step. And again, I noticed recently that PBOT is partnering with Prosper Portland to provide additional discounts for small businesses. Maybe this can help convince some business owners that street parking spaces aren't necessarily the greatest use of space in the city. Next slide. Another opportunity here is time discount trial periods. So previously in 2018 in May, Biketown was free for the entire month. And during that month, it saw a 113% increase in trips compared to the previous May. So trips more than doubled when it's free. That's really great. However, based on the current pricing scheme, it's pretty unlikely that the system would be entirely free for everyone for an entire month again. But knowing that these pricing incentives work really well, I feel like this is a good avenue for getting more people to try the system. And this is something that Lyft has already been playing around with and Biketown has been playing around with by giving people free credits to go to the polls around election day, or more recently, they're giving people $5 credits to go to small business districts and to go shopping at local businesses. Again, it's important to remember here that Lyft is the owner, the operator of Biketown, and they're a company that hasn't broken a profit yet. Hopefully, we'll see that change in the next year or two. But it's always interesting to see these public-private partnerships and how they come to life. Next slide. That's it. I hope I haven't gone too much over on time, but thank you.
You're good. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. I know Biketown can go for several hours in the event of a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. So you're good for a couple of hours and you can get yourself across the bridge if your home is on the other side. So let's take a break. I think we've earned some downtime. It is the evening, so let's do a 10-minute break. I know last week we were only able to do 5, but let's do a 10-minute break and come back at 8:55. 7:55. We'll see you in a bit. Thank you. Folks are returning back one by one. 5 minutes of your life makes a difference. We are nearing the end. Hanging in there, everyone. How is everyone doing? Okay.
Bum, the class is over.
Oh, bum, the class is over. Well, you know, I really encourage you guys to stay in touch. I know I created that Slack channel. We're also connected on that private page for Facebook. Somewhere along the lines, we might do a 30th year reunion with everybody else. I'm not sure how that's going to work out. I just couldn't take that on this week. I mean, this year. This week. Not this week. Thank you for coming back. So next up is Marie. And I will.
Hello.
Laura. Yeah. Hi, Marie.
So,
and we'll bring a presentation.
cool.
It's been fun. Let me tell you, it's been fun. It's been work, but it's been fun. So I'm hoping that it's also been rewarding for you as well.
Great. Before I start, I'm sorry if you hear sounds. I can definitely repeat myself if anybody needs me to. But yes, my name is Marie Hefliger. I am a graduate student at PSU pursuing my GIS certificate. And so my project is on using GIS to evaluate TriMet station, walkability, and accessibility. So next slide, please. So a little background on this project. So this photo is an image of the area that I grew up in. It is the San Gabriel Valley, which is kind of a suburb of Los Angeles. And I experienced a lot of urban sprawl growing up. I was very fortunate where I grew up. However, I had a lot of privilege associated with the area. However, one struggle I had in regards to transportation was that you needed a car to get around. There was no bus station. There was a trolley line kind of in my neighborhood, but it was axed back in the day by a car company, or I think it was Ford. But so there's a lot of urban sprawl. So next slide, please. And so when I moved to Portland, I kind of felt that it was sort of a transportation utopia. This is a photo of a portion of Portland's urban growth boundary, meaning that sprawl, like in the last photo, is limited. So that has made a huge difference in my personal experience in Portland. However, I recognize that, considering, a lot of components of my identity, that my experience with public transportation is not universal, and that my view of Portland's transportation system as a utopia is a very privileged outlook. And I wanted to use this project as a way to sort of explore that more in depth and look at the TriMet streetcar and MAX station, or streetcar and light rail stations in particular, and sort of look at a number of criteria and measures of accessibility, connectivity, safety, and whatnot. So next slide, please. And so just a little bit of context on what GIS is. I'll go really fast, but GIS is a kind of, I think of it as a framework software. It's lots of different types of software that are used to sort of combine geographic data with non-geographic data, and it allows us to look at patterns, identify patterns and see them in different ways. And I've loved it as a kind of a career, or looking as something I'm looking into and something I'm really interested in. But next slide, please. But also equity and social justice is something that's also been really important to me. However, I've seen kind of less of that as I've gotten into GIS, which is more of a STEM, more of a data focused kind of thing. However, this class has really helped open my eyes to the fact that there is a role for social justice and equity in this field in general. And so that was kind of the reminder I needed, I think, going forward. And so these are just a few examples of how, what kind of inspired this project for me, of how social justice and equity can be used in GIS, and a great reminder for me going forward. So next slide, please. And so, like I said, the project that I did was on using GIS to evaluate TriMet station walkability and accessibility. And so I looked at the area that I live in, which is the South Park blocks in downtown Portland. And that was my general study area. And I decided to focus on one specific TriMet Max Light rail station and one streetcar station in the downtown park blocks. Next slide, please. And so these are the two stations that I decided to focus on. And I created, using the software, I created these buffers around, or these kind of areas around where if you're using these stations, you're probably going to walk in around. And I used that as a way to kind of look deeper into these areas. So next slide, please. And so I created these service zones, and they're areas of walking distance. And I looked at accessibility and street connectivity. So next slide, please. So this is one of the stations I looked at. It is the Southwest Park and Market Station station, and I created the service zone around it. And so as you can see in this image, that's where the station is, where the little diamond is, and the area around it is where the pink is. Next slide, please. And this is the other station I looked at. It is the PSU and 6th Avenue station and 500 feet around it. Next slide, please. And so I used a kind of formula to look at the area around, and this is a measure I have learned about. It kind of basically sort of calculates the walkable area compared to the general surface area. And it is a really interesting measure because I think it's an example of a concrete statistical finding that we can use and that can be used to look deeper into a specific station area and evaluate it on a variety of things. And so one of those is the pedestrian catchment ratio, which is the area that is walkable essentially. And like I said, this project was an opportunity to kind of look deeper into what is walkable. Is walkable, but is walkable truly walkable? And I think that was a really great learning experience. And so PCR as a measure, the score of around 0.5 is kind of an ideal range, or the lower end of the ideal range, and 0.3 indicates an inaccessible walking area, an area that's mostly dedicated to cars and whatnot. And yeah, so next slide, please. And so the scores that I calculated for this project, so the Southwest Park and Market Station Service Zone got 0.51, and PSU and 6th Station Service Area yielded 0.62. And I think that's just sort of, it shows that they're in range. A good amount of space is devoted to walkability. However, going forward, there might be an opportunity to devote a lot more of the land to pedestrians and to just kind of people on their feet rather than cars. And I thought that's a really interesting measure, and I was really excited to explore that a bit more. It's something I learned about a while ago. Yeah, the next slide, please. And so I also looked at land use. And as you can see, one of the 6th Street station is completely central commercial designated. And the other one has a few other, it's open space, which are the parks and the park blocks, and residential and commercial. So next slide, please. And finally, so since I was doing a project to evaluate connectivity and accessibility, I spoke to a member of the Committee on Accessible Transportation within TriMet, and it was a woman named Kristen Megre. I believe I'm pronouncing her last name correctly, but she identified as somebody who is legally blind, and she just gave me a really good rundown of what their committee does and how they advise policy, like the TriMet on policy decisions and what their focuses are. And I think it was a really great perspective in doing this project, because like I said, I feel like I have a lot of privilege when it comes to transportation. So it was really a great opportunity to learn about how you know, the gap between getting on the metro and sorry, not metro, I'm from Los Angeles, that's what it's called there, the MAX and the sidewalk, that can be an issue, about how you know, not being able to see people around you and how having a need for security is an issue. So I really appreciated this project as something I think I'll keep in mind going forward in my career, hopefully in GIS, that social justice and equity can definitely be included in it. It's not just all data management. So thank you so much. And please give me any questions.
Awesome, thank you. Again, this turned out to be a big transit night. So perhaps TriMet would like to hear your presentation too. Bob is here, so perhaps you two can connect up and you can do a presentation at TriMet. I think that's great. Thank you. Next up is Ada. Libraries. Yes, transportation and libraries. Libraries have become a thing in the last.
Thank you for the time and space. Just a quick overview of my personal connection. Yeah, we could go to the next slide. Thank you. Just a quick overview of my personal connection to this project. I was born and raised in Jakarta, Indonesia, and there we've got almost too many options of transportation modes, and it's super congested with little to no access to public libraries still to this day. And I moved to the US in 1999. And one of the things that I love about living here is the fact that we have access to libraries in our schools and in our communities. The concept of having almost unlimited access to books is still mind-blowing to me. But more than that, the library has always been a safe place for me. In high school, the library was where I hid from other students during lunchtime. And for my mom, who didn't have any support system in the area at the time, the community library was somewhat like a daycare for me and my younger brother. She would drop us off and return after she ran her errands. And so for this project, I look back to the different forms of transportations required for me to get to the library, starting from high school till present time. The next slide, please. So the library as a community center. During my research for this project, I learned that many people call the library as a second home or a safe place for them. And this is because the library has functioned as a community hub for a long time. The Multnomah County Library has a long list of services and resources that are available in multiple formats and languages. And here's just some of the services available at the library. And most, if not all of them, are resulted from partnership with outside of library agencies. But one thing I noticed is that there isn't currently a partnership with local transportation agencies. And during this summer, thinking about resiliency, during the pandemic, the library offered free sack lunches for students K to 12, as well as free computers. Some branches also set up outdoor computer lab with free Wi-Fi access and printing. And this is key to those who are job seeking and have no access to a computer or internet connection. And this growing list of services and resources is part of the library's effort to address diversity, inclusivity, resiliency, and equity in Portland. Next slide, please. Except that when we look at the current service area, the library space and population distribution map, it shows that the library is not currently serving the Portland communities in the areas that would benefit from the library services the most. To quote the Friends of the Library Executive Director, the library is serving our privileged community and not the underserved. So let's take a look closer at the library service area map in relation to the underserved communities. Next slide, please. So this is a community of opportunity map. The circles, the gray circles represent library service areas, and they're about a 2-mile radius. The percentage of population in poverty is presented in the area background colors. The darker the brown shade represents a higher percentage of population experiencing poverty. Next slide, please. The library location in relation to household with internet access is shown in this map. A Pew Research Center reported teens in household earning less than $30,000 are 3 times likely to report having trouble completing homework assignments. And nearly half of the teens in low-income families do their homework on their cell phones. The data also involves racial disparities. 1 out of 5 Black teens rely on public Wi-Fi sources through businesses and libraries. Next slide, please. And here's a map that shows active library card holders that are within the library buffer or circle. The darker the orange shade represents higher count of active library card holders. It reiterates that the library isn't currently servicing the underserved communities due to lack of branches in the area. And also, I think the distance it requires for someone to travel to a library branch. Next slide, please. And the good news is the library bond passed. And in addition to upgrading high-speed Wi-Fi in every branch, there's also a plan to build a new branch and a flagship library in the East Portland neighborhood. Next slide, please. So I've covered some problem areas, and one of them is going to be addressed by the library bond. But I was also wondering if there is an opportunity to address these problems from a public transportation perspective. Next slide, please. We've seen through presentations in our class that PBOT, Metro, and TriMet all have goals that will address equity, diversity, inclusivity, and resiliency goals. We've seen the maps where transportation agencies need to address their goals, and they seem to overlap with areas that the library is currently underserving. So I was wondering is there a partnership with public transportation agency that can do to help the library expand its outreach and investment in the underserved communities. Next slide, please. So some ideas that I discussed with other folks while doing this research. One of them is a library shuttle, much like the TriMet current LIFT program. And another is how Beaverton School District is currently operating their buses as library bus delivering books to students. But I also found another idea that has already been implemented in other cities and some in other countries, and that is providing free public transit for library card holders. Next slide, please. Going through some quick examples. This is a Springfield Public Library. According to the library's associate manager, people have a hard time getting to the library, particularly the people who need it the most. If you have a car and you're driving all the time, you don't think about it. But if you don't, especially if you have small children, it's a big barrier. Even a mile away can be a long walk with a toddler or a 6-year-old in tow. So the Springfield Public Library offered students and their families free bus passes. And since then, they have seen increase in library signups and more teens coming who often say that they took the bus. Next slide, please. Here's an example from Iowa City Public Library. During the summer, the Iowa City Public Library provides free transit to children through 12th grade and their caregivers who are with them. They just need to show the bus drivers their library card. Year-round, the library provides 2 free bus passes each week to a library card holder of all ages. Next slide, please. Lastly, this is the Capital Area District Libraries in Lansing, Michigan. They allow library card holders to check out a bus pass for 30 days, and it works just like checking out a book. Next slide, please. So with those examples, some assumptions of what could happen as a result of providing free transit to Multnomah County library card holder is that it will reduce a significant barrier for communities to get to any library, not just the ones available in their neighborhood. It will also increase public transit ridership, which I've heard that is a concern. Expand library services to the underserved communities. Also address both public transit agency and the library goals in equity, diversity, inclusivity, and resiliency. And lastly, we'll get Portland, a step closer to be on the growing list of cities that provide free public transport. Last slide. So, of course, this is all blue sky concept. I've been discussing this with the representative from the library, but I would love to discuss it and get feedback from transportation agency representative as well as community organizers. And hopefully, if it is a feasible project, I would want to, collaborate and engage with communities and design a pilot program based on a community input. Thank you.
Well done. I think there's a vision there, a big one. I think I shared with you at the beginning or the second class, I grew up here I grew up here as an immigrant in Portland on the bus. So I took the bus everywhere. The bus was my second home. So at least once a week or once every 2 weeks, I'd gather all my books from the library that I get to check out. I think maximum like 15, maybe. And then I check it out for 2 weeks and haul all those books back 2 weeks later, back to the library and do a rotation. So it's a great vision. I hope you research on that. So lastly, we have Julie, who's going to talk about some artwork in streets.
Okay, I think I'm set. First off, I just want to say Hanukkah Sameach to anyone else who is celebrating the first night tonight. We need the light. Okay, so here we are, Artists in the Streets, or how a municipal artist in residency program will improve resilience, make moving through communities more enjoyable, boost neighborhood connectivity, strengthen cultural ties, and transform Portland as we know it. Next slide, please. So most of us are familiar with public art projects commissioned by transit agencies like TriMet, things like sculptures along Max lines. But beyond decoration, what do artists have to do with transportation, and how might they help Portland and PBOT meet their goals for safe, green, and equitable streets? Next slide, please. So here are just a few ways. I could talk about all of these points at length, but I'll highlight just a few I think are particularly pertinent to our city. So the first one is generate creative solutions to entrenched transportation problems. So artists are not trained as engineers or planners, but they are trained as creative thinkers and are more likely to come up with creative solutions to existing problems. This might be a physical solution or a social solution. Second key point is engaging multiple stakeholders for an inclusive process. So this is key. Artists think about and do community engagement differently. This is especially true for BIPOC or immigrant artists who are engaging those communities, and more broadly for artists working in communities where they live. Third point here is healing wounds and divisions. And this is really essential in Portland. So racist policies, so-called urban renewal, I-5 construction, and ongoing gentrification rip the historically Black albino community to pieces. East Portland has decades of underinvestment and higher rates of traffic fatalities. So while sidewalks, street lighting, and rethinking roads are all necessary, PBOT can also play a healing role by investing in community arts projects. Next slide, please. So Portland streets are our largest public asset, as was mentioned earlier tonight, yet most people think of streets as places to move through, not places for connection, creativity, or change. COVID-19 and recent racial justice protests have started to change this, and artists can be part of shifting how people engage with and feel in the public right-of-way. Next slide. So what if a commute or a neighborhood walk made a person feel more connected to their community? Might mode share shift if more people were not only to safely cycle or walk from A to B, but if they experienced delight along the way? So artists can play a key role in building social infrastructure. Sociologists such as Eric Kleinenberg have found evidence of social infrastructure playing a life-saving role in times of crisis. Locally, the City Club Earthquake Resilience Report highlights the need to empower communities to strengthen local connections, and they call out the Oregon Resilience Plan for failure to address social resilience. A PBOT Artist in Residence program can build social infrastructure alongside physical infrastructure. Next slide. So while transit agencies are required to go to communities as they plan transportation projects, there's no requirement for post-build community engagement. Transit planners and engineers miss opportunity for social and cultural projects. So rather than accept this missing as inevitable, PBOT can work with artists to shift how engagement happens and who is engaged. Next slide, please. So no matter the program model, sorry, the slide, the words are a little messed up there. No matter the program model, and there are many, many options, here are some key foundations. So equity must be woven throughout the selection of artists, projects, and project sites. PBOT's citywide reach provides an opportunity to engage communities ignored most by arts organizations, which tend to be centered downtown or certainly west of 82nd. And when possible, artists should be local to the communities in which they are working. Investment. So while artists are much cheaper than concrete, the program will also require money and attention. Making the case for this expense might mean measuring and thinking about success in some new ways. And buy-in. So PBOT needs to understand that artists are a value add and not a drag on the real work. When community members and local stakeholders from neighborhood dance studios or community grocery store have a sense of ownership, they will be more willing to engage. Next slide, please. So I don't have time to discuss all of the possible artist in residency structures, but my preferred solution balances both breadth and depth. So my proposal would be that each year, PBOT would select a project for artists in residence. Depending on what stage that project is in, pre-planning, design, construction, post-build, the artist's role and output would shift. Specific goals or working areas such as increasing mode share, education, or project input would be outlined by PBOT in an RFP. Each residency would last 1 to 3 years, and each year PBOT would onboard at least one new artist in residence project. The long-term engagement is really essential. An artist in residency project could be an individual artist, an artist team, or it might be many smaller projects engaging many artists and groups, and that could change year by year. So this model presents the most opportunity for artists to be working and engaging with people in multiple parts of the city at one time in multiple ways. And this map just shows a few projects that are happening in the city in different areas that could have artist projects connected to them. Next slide, please. So while a PBOT housed artist in residency program would be new, municipal artist in residency programs are not. Just a few examples. Since 1977, Meryl Latimer Ukales has been an artist in residence at the New York City Department of Sanitation. LA Department of Transportation, Washington State Department of Transportation, and the Minnesota Department of Transportation all introduced artist in residence programs in the last 4 years. That photo in the center is of Alan Nakagawa, who was working with Vision Zero. In Vancouver, British Columbia, their engineering services department has a 2-year artist in residence. And this is a very cool bicycle powered charging station that was built by their most recent resident, Jermaine Coe. And then next slide, please. So PBOT has already done some of this work, and it's been really incredible. The Historic Black Williams project that engaged artists Cleo Davis and K.N. Talton Davis also engaged many members of the community and was implemented alongside RAC. If you haven't seen those along Williams, you should. Portland in the Streets community grants were awarded, including photo here of a wayfinding project in Cully neighborhood. And then other organizations are doing this kind of work. So Apano's cultural work includes placemaking and placekeeping projects in the Jade and Midway, and Metro's placemaking grants. There are no shortage of grantee or applicants, but limited dollars and not as much money as, of course, everyone would want. Next slide, please. So we know that our city's transportation problems need creative solutions, and who better to offer that up than artists working hand in hand with our city's Transportation Bureau. If you're interested in learning more, I'd love to talk with you. That's all. Thanks.
Let's give everyone a round of applause. It's been amazing to listen to this. I think it's awesome to go through these presentations. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well done. Actually, all of you who presented work on your project. These were like passion projects. They're all very inspiring, creative, and very collaborative. And like I said earlier at the beginning of classes, some of these projects actually did get implemented. So if you follow up with your contacts, follow up with those you reached out to, there may be some grant funding. So I'm not surprised later on in the next couple of years, some of these projects may come to fruition, and you'll come back and look at this class and remember us being here during COVID. So good job, everybody. The core of my work, as I mentioned at the beginning, is equity, community, and resiliency. So I love that I'm able to take what I love in terms of my planning, and my passion and my work, and to really disseminate that and bring it to you in this platform today and this whole term. So it's been amazing. Do we have any last words from our reviewers? I know Aaron had mentioned at the beginning that there were, it's like a box of chocolate. Each presentation is kind of like a box of chocolate, but I'd love to get some, just from a one-liner feedback, if possible, from Aaron. Millicent, you're here, thank you. And also Bob, just give you that floor to report back to us.
Well, I'll just say I'm so proud to live in a city where our members of the public want to spend their Thursday nights nerding out on transportation, and arguably, you know, pushing the experts and becoming experts in their own right. So super excited, and look forward to next year.
Thank you.
Melissa? I want to echo exactly what Aaron said as a becoming experts as you challenge the experts. And I also want to commend Melissa's wonderful kind of introduction, both as her own personal story, but also helping to sort of set the stage about the larger social issues that transportation are really a foundational part of. I think that's just what this class is about. And what I also want to commend the presenters that I saw tonight, and I didn't see the first night's presentations, but to do something in such a short duration and to deliver it so succinctly and yet to be so provocative in what you were discussing and sharing, and the passion that came through, and the rigor that you put behind delivering that passion, was not sloppy. It was not sophomoric. It was actually very honed and very skillful. Um, as I've messaged to several folks who have specifically were talking about TriMet stuff, yes, definitely, Tui, we need to follow up and find a way to share this information, because that's what applied research can do for all of our bureaus. And yeah, what a great way to spend a Thursday night, on a rainy Thursday night. We got nothing else. There's no sports. There's no other entertainment. There's no musical concerts. You guys actually have found probably the best thing that we could talk about this year. And I'm humbled by that. Thank you.
Been 30 years on a Thursday night, ongoing, COVID or not. Millicent, thank you, Bob.
Yeah, I echo the sentiments of Aaron and Bob. And again, thank you for the opportunity to participate in tonight's class and to listen to the perspectives and the presentations that folks have shared. I'm looking forward to seeing many of you, if not all of you, in another setting where we're really digging in on solving tough problems and being innovative in doing so. I think that there's more than one way to do anything. And to the extent that even a young agency, and PBOT is relatively young, it's 30 years old. It was something else before, but PBOT, the Bureau of Transportation, is about 30 years old. And while young, it can be a little set in its ways. And so I think we have an opportunity to shake up the status quo and to change the conversation and to really cause people and push people to think differently. So thank you for your energy. I agree that you have chosen to do this for a semester. And granted, we didn't have a lot of options to do other things, but that you're enriching yourselves and also enriching us is to me time well spent. And I'm just glad to be a part of this ever evolving conversation. So you all were great. I'm sure that we'll be able to connect with each other. Either Tui or Michael can share our contact information. I guess we can also put it in the chat, but don't let this be the last time we hear from you. And don't think you're bothering us. Although you may be, just don't think, just act like you're not. No, and I kid a lot, so I'm playing, but don't fail to reach out. We'd be honored to hear from you.
We're so lucky. You're one of my favorite from PBOT, so I'm so honored to have you here. You know that. So I barely have 6 minutes left of class, and what I want to do is to thank you for participating in the scavenger hunt game that we've put together. In lieu of the field trip, a dim sum breakfast field trip that I always do for all of my classes. It couldn't happen this year. We did a scavenger hunt where students went around the city and different parts of the city and took pictures of different modes of transportation. And it was really fun to go through each of your board game. It was kind of like a scavenger hunt bingo game. So tonight, as we close up the night, I want to thank you for participating. It was kind of like this pilot. What are we going to do in lieu of like actually getting together? And some of the pictures were amazing. It was fun to look through. You guys did a fantastic job. They were very creative. Molsri and I went through them, and we have 4 blackout winners. And Thank you for PBOT. The blackout winners will be gifted some gift cards. So we will send you some gift cards, and those winners, as I announce them, Byron Palmer. Byron, you're one of our winners. Oh, I'm doing this. I know. James, you're another blackout winner. Josh as well, and Julie. So it was fun. Thank you for indulging me in this game. It really gave a chance for you to go out and explore and take pictures and play this. So it was fun. One of the things that I want to mention on my list, my to-do list with you as we close up classes, you are sent out class evaluations. So remember to fill it out, send it. I had asked for it to be submitted to us by early next week. So if you can get that in as soon as possible, before you forget, please do that. It gives us feedback on how we've done, how we could do better, and how we can improve in the class.
And the winners of the scavenger hunt game, if you could send me your mailing address, your home address, we would love to send you the gift cards there. That would be nice. And also, if somebody did not receive the evaluation survey, to let me know. I tried to send it to everybody, but if I missed, then I'll just send it again.
Thank you, Malsri. Sometimes I forget on things that I need to announce, so thanks. And graduation certificates. We started this again last year. I know they did it in the past, and those who did presentations, had worked on their and presented, will all receive a graduation certificate from this class, signed by our director, our commissioner in charge, and me. So that should also be coming into your mail. What I'll do is
You can look for an email from me, and I'll collect a good mailing address for you, and then get those on their way to you. Congratulations, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll get the list to Michael, and then he'll reach out to you for your address. So it'll be sent to you in the mail. That's it for me. I just want to say a big thank you. Feel free to chime in however you want. It's been a wonderful time spent. And I'm really glad I got to spend it with each of you. Thank you. Shall we meet again in person someday?